Hey everyone, and welcome to this Risky Business product demo. These are sponsored demos where we get one of our sponsors to come along and show you all their technology. And today we're going to be taking a deep dive on the RunZero product, which used to be called Rumble back in the day before they changed the name. This, of course, is a company founded by InfoSec industry legend HD Moore. Joining me now is Ali Cheikh, who is the Senior Sales Engineer for RunZero. Is that right?
That is correct, Patrick.
Excellent. And he's going to walk us through the product. But first of all, I mean, look, let's just tell everyone what it is and what it does. I think the simplest way to describe what RunZero does is it is asset discovery. It goes out and it finds everything in your network through a combination of active scanning and pulling data from other technology you have in your environment through APIs and whatnot. I mean, and then it brings all of that information in and does very smart things with it to tell you exactly what you have. That's basically it, isn't it?
That is correct. Absolutely. Spot on, Patrick. And I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you. You kind of summed it up perfectly. And I think fundamentally, it comes down to being able to answer, what do I have in my network? You know, there's the very famous quote of you can't protect what you can't see. And that is so true. So that is why many cybersecurity best practices, frameworks, or regulations, they have asset visibility as their first requirement. For example, critical security controls with CIS, their number one control is actually to establish and maintain a detailed enterprise asset inventory. So being able to answer the question like, what assets do I have in a certain data center or a certain subnet? And that can be across IT devices, OT devices, IoT, and being able to answer who owns that device and how critical is it and is it risky, without having to juggle between 5 to 6 different solutions to get to that answer.
Excellent. Wonderful, wonderful stuff. And I believe too, I think there's some CISA directives or whatnot coming down for FedGov as well. Like it's just becoming a thing that people are expected to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Recently we had the CISA BOD 2301 that actually had requirement to have an asset inventory decoupled from vulnerability scanners and being it in a timely manner.
Yeah, because people have been skating through on that, right, for a little bit too long, which is like, hey, what do you mean? I've got vuln scanning. It's like, yeah, but your vuln scanning only sees what it knows is there, right?
Exactly.
So that's not actually discovery. All right, so why don't you walk us through the product? What are you going to show us first?
Yeah, so I was going to start with kind of covering how do we get data into RunZero, and then after that, kind of show the asset inventory side. So let's jump into it. This is the RunZero console that you kind of see here, and we support multiple ways of deploying RunZero, just to kick that off. And we support an on-prem deployment of the full platform, and we call it self-hosted. The one that I'm showing right here is the SaaS console, and on the top left here, you can see the data sources. And that essentially is the different ways that we can pull data into RunZero. The first one I wanted to cover is the unauthenticated active scanner. That allows to essentially discover assets that exist in your network. And the fact that it's unauthenticated, it doesn't require any sort of credentials to discover assets.
As HD has said before on my podcast, it doesn't go spraying your domain credentials around everywhere, right? Yep. So, and we should point out too, this is where the product started. When it started, it was called Rumble, and the way it started was just with this network scanning component, which is, I mean, it is magic when you see what it can divine from an unauthenticated scan. It's like still people will run it for the first time and say, how did it see that? Like, I don't understand how this works. It shouldn't be able to give me this. So that was as I say, that was the first cornerstone of the product, which is this extremely advanced network-based scanner.
Absolutely. And that comes from HD's experience and brain having worked as a pen tester over the years. And you're right. I joined Rumble or RunZero today. Back then, it was called Rumble almost 2 years ago. And it did start as an authenticated active scanner to focus on being able to discover what assets exist in your network. But now, of course, we're much more than that.
Well, I think to a degree, from an image perspective, RunZero's been a little bit of a victim of its early success because still I talk to people and they say, oh, yeah, RunZero, but they only do a scanner, right? And it's like, no, they don't. That's... it's still a very important part of the product, but you have other means to get data into the platform as well, which I'm guessing is what you're going to walk us through now.
Exactly. Yeah, we can compare them to Nmap, and maybe back in 2019 you could compare it to Nmap, but we'll kind of show how much it's different now.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Yeah, so totally agree. You don't need to put any credentials, so that doesn't need to be sprayed. And honestly, what we do need is simply IP address ranges, and those can be subnets, and we support both IPv4 and IPv6 out of the box. And we'll scan with for IT, IoT, and OT with that scanner. And the Explorer is actually very portable, and we support multiple operating systems. You can even deploy it on a Raspberry Pi. That's how much lightweight it is.
Yeah.
And if you don't have, we talk to you and you say, well, actually, I don't know where to start. There is so many different subnets, so many different IP addresses that we have. We support the capacity to kick off one single scan that will do a full RFC 1918 scan. That's going to go across all of your private IP ranges and then scan and find IPs that responds to that. So that's really helpful if you don't know where to start.
Yeah.
And the other way of populating data into the inventory, this is actually pretty new, is the passive traffic sampling. And that's a really exciting feature because this is not your typical, passive network monitoring that requires huge hardware appliances to be sent and shipped to your data center. And that requires a lot of resources. What's great about this is the passive traffic sampling it can be used as an always-on discovery that is continuously listening to traffic, or also you can think of it as a wingman to the active scan that we just talked about. And if we miss, for example, an active scan window, or if you have an environment where it has fragile OT devices and you don't want to deploy an active scanner, the passive traffic sampling is a very good use for that kind of setup.
Yeah. I mean, plenty of places have rules about that, right? They just won't let you do an active scan of an OT environment. But what's funny about that is I know how much work the team at RunZero did to make the active scans actually extremely safe for OT environments. And then they presented it to the market and said, look, it's completely safe. And people are like, we don't care. It's our rule that you cannot do active scanning in this environment, so you have to build a passive scanner. But you have it now, so that's good.
Exactly.
So you can passively or actively scan your OT, right?
Right, 100%. And actually, we have a lot of customers that are in the medical space and manufacturing space that run the active scanner from RunZero on the floor and actually discovering OT, manufacturing, robot, et cetera, et cetera. So you're absolutely right. It is safe. But
the robot arms are not going to start taking people's heads off, right? It's fine.
Exactly. Right. So with the passive traffic sampling, you can essentially set up the discovery scope that you want us to listen. So we'll just ingest the information and reflect it on a dashboard if it's part of that IP range. And keep in mind that this is with the aim of being able to build an accurate asset inventory. So that's why.
So you just plug that into a span port somewhere, right?
Exactly. And if you do have span tap ports already connected, definitely that's the way to go. But if you don't, we also will listen to broadcast traffic, so DNS, DHCP, and all of those things. In case you don't have that in place.
Okay.
And we also support, another thing to talk about, we also support being able to import a PCAP file. It's very, very helpful in the case that you want to ingest data from a recent packet capture that maybe happened in an offsite or a certain point in time in investigation, or maybe you cannot have the active scanner the Explorer deployed there. So you can still import a packet.
No, I can see where that'd be useful. Yeah, when someone just wants to take a look maybe one time at one environment and just see what's going on.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Do we need to actually do more active monitoring here? Let's take a look and see what's what. Yeah.
Right. Exactly. And then another way is being able to leverage current investments that you've made in security tools and IT tools. So being able to integrate with other third-party solutions via APIs. And that allows us to get more details and enrichments in either assets we've scanned and discovered with the Explorer, or maybe bring in new assets that we haven't scanned yet. So you see the list here. We have several vulnerability management solutions, cloud service providers, MDMs, EDRs, et cetera, et cetera. And what that allows us to do is one thing that is pretty cool, and I'll show in a demo in a bit, is being able to provide security control coverage gap. So I want to understand.
Oh yeah. I mean, I was
EDR deployed.
Yeah, I was gonna ask a prompting question about that, because that's always hard, is to know, like, do we have EDR on every single one of our Windows boxes? Like we should.
Exactly.
And that's a really hard question to answer, because as you said right at the start of this whole thing, you can't really protect what you don't know is there. And it's one of those things that you don't know, and it can really hurt you. One interesting thing is, though, I've seen people using asset tracking stuff before, not just to spot install gaps, but also to do internal audits of license usage. So they can actually often recover their investment in asset tracking stuff because they realize, hey, we're using 20% fewer licenses than we thought we were. Let's go and tell the vendor that and, cut down our support contract, right? So that is actually something that happens. So yeah, it's interesting.
That's true. Yeah, that's very true. Or even from operating system licensing perspective, and I'll show that in a bit. Like we can show you the operating systems in place. Do you have enough licenses, or maybe you're overutilizing or underutilizing your OS licenses, for example?
Yeah, exactly.
In the integrations here, we'll bring, of course, asset data, but we'll also bring in vulnerabilities, software, and then what assets maybe are running on the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So
this is easy to do, right? Like this is quite often just a couple of pop-up boxes, paste in an API key, and away you go.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Fairly straightforward. And in the case that you don't see a product that you're currently using in this list, we have a custom SDK that we support where you can essentially build a data ingestion mechanism for that solution into RunZero, and then we'll pull in like asset data as well. So we're trying to cover all of the bases to make sure we can integrate with as many tools as possible.
Awesome.
And combining all of those different sources together and tying it all together, I'd say, is our fingerprinting. And you mentioned that, Patrick, earlier. Being able to just, without any authentication, actively scan the network and come back with information, what the OS, what the type, what the hardware is. So fingerprinting, in simple terms, is the ability for us to identify what that IP address is. So that's kind of a really strong point of RunZero, and it ties all of this together. We have a research team that is dedicated with, on top of it, of course, HD, dedicated to kind of improving that fingerprint continuously across all of the devices.
Now, the reason Ali mentions, in addition to HD, is because he's sort of renowned as he's one of those people who's been in InfoSec for 20 plus years. He was the guy who created Metasploit. He's a friend of mine. He's just insanely, ridiculously good at this stuff. Yep. He's basically like a one-man research team, which is why he said, our research team in addition to HD, right? So that's kind of like two research teams.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now we covered the way to put data into RunZero, the different data sources. Now let's talk about the asset inventory side of the house. And this is the page or the kind of view that I think people go to first and spend the most time.
Yeah, so this is the main guts of the product, I guess.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And it kind of shows you all of the assets that you have in your environment in a single view. And this is across IoT devices, OT devices, IoT. Those can be internal, external. And actually, I just remembered we didn't talk when we were talking about the active scanner. We also have the ability to host an active scanner for you in RunZero Cloud if you're interested to understand what is the external attack surface looks like. So in the case of RiskyBiz, I want to see what assets are visible from the internet. We also have the ability to do that. So you can have the external, internal viewer inside out and outside. Yeah.
Well, and you're also pulling data from, and what's cool about that is you're also pulling data from stuff like AWS if you want to connect to AWS, exactly. And then you can start matching up. Here's the stuff we're seeing from outside with, here's the stuff we pulled through the AWS API, and you can say, well, this is what it looks like on the outside, this is what it looks like on the inside. So yeah, it's very cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought you were going to mention initially the integrations with Sense and show that the external attack surface management tools, which also we support. So on top of our ability to do external scanning, we can integrate with those tools that correlate.
Well, no, they're doing internet-wide scanning and maybe are going to attribute some assets to you that a direct IP range scan or whatever is going to miss, or a direct scan that's just relying on DNS data. Like they might find something, right? So, but I think either way, like even if you're just using RunZero for that, you're in pretty good shape, right? So
absolutely, But I'll keep on saying the word asset, and I think it's worth just explaining what asset means from RunZero perspective, and it's simply an entity. So that can be a virtual, physical, it can be a smart home Alexa device, even a mattress, that home that you've scanned that is connected to the Wi-Fi. So those are all considered assets. And you kind of see the different correlation, which is bringing data from different sources. And when I click on this IP address, it takes me to the details of that asset. And you notice the different metadata that we've pulled in from the different integrations. And by the way, all of these attributes or data points you can build queries on, which we'll talk about in a second, but you can do searches on them if needed. So it's very extensive in the way that you can look and investigate and, pick and choose what data you're interested in looking at. But yeah, so the third-party information, obviously things related to TCP/IP stack, we will show you what vulnerabilities are impacting that specific asset. Those are both vulnerabilities scanned by RunZero, but also imported by third-party solutions, like CrowdStrike Spotlight or Tenable, Qualys, etc., as well as what software is installed on that specific machine, and then finally, what ports and protocols are running on that asset.
Yeah.
One critical
You know what it had for breakfast at that point, right?
Exactly.
Like, you know who it hangs out with. You know what it did last summer. Yeah, you've got the whole
the magnifying glass on that asset. Exactly. And one critical data point that is worth mentioning here is we've talked to enterprise customers and we've kind of shown the inventory. The next difficult question for them is who owns that asset, and being able to answer that question very, very quickly. So,
and that's why you've got your directory integrations, right?
Yeah, exactly. Spot on. So we added the ability to essentially manage asset ownership and assign asset ownership into an asset. You can kind of see it here on the right. And the cool thing is we actually understood that ownership is not a singular value. So it's not just one owner. You have multiple owners usually. You have the IT department, security, and then the CTO, et cetera, et cetera.
I mean, we should probably explain, like, the reason this came up as an issue is because RunZero would come along and say, hey, look at all of these boxes that are in a terrible state that you didn't know existed, that are running ancient stuff. Let's fix them. And then it's like, well, hang on, who do we even talk to get them fixed? Because we don't really know who's responsible for them, right? So that's when you had to develop this to tell people, you need to go and yell at Sarah, or you need to go and yell at Bob because they're not doing their jobs properly, and here's the thing they need to fix. I mean, that's essentially what you did, 100%.
Right? Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you don't have to jump between 3 different tools to get to that data, which increases time. And when you're doing an incident response or your investigation, you need to have that data as soon as possible. So
or even just like, forget about incident response, even just trying to tidy up your environment when you're early on with the product, right? And trying to fix it. Like being able to just send an email to someone or spin up a ticket, and bring in the right people. Like, it turns something that would be, quite a headache. Right. And you say, go to other tools, but like, you might not have access to those tools. And like, it turns something that can be quite a headache into something that's like, okay, well, I'll just start a ticket or email this person. Yeah,
exactly. Right. 100%. And you mentioned earlier, we integrate with directory services. So this actually pulls up from, and I'll pick the name of HT here. This picks up from Active Directory, Azure Active Directory, etc. So you can essentially integrate with those tools, bring in user information, and then assign the ownership here. So we don't only support manual ownership assignment. You can also do it via rules to automate it. And you can pick, things like IP address ranges. If you know that a certain data center, there is a security owner there or an IT owner based on IP address, you can automatically assign that. We can even use, we've seen a lot of times, host names have some level of indication of what team owns that asset or what is the function of that asset. So you can use that to essentially automatically assign.
I realized I just made a mistake because I thought you were actually pulling ownership information somehow from the directory. But what it sounds like you're doing is you're actually using the product to say, okay, I'm going to make it this person's problem. I'm going to make it Sarah's problem or Bob's problem or whatever. Right? It kind of okay, so my mistake. My bad.
No problem. And actually, we are bringing asset ownership information, or let me say this, we're bringing user information from directories, but the asset ownership is being tracked and manually managed in RunZero, if that makes sense.
Okay, so it's more like, you've got the user information from the directory and then you tag the ownership and you say, okay, I'm going to make it this person's problem.
Exactly.
Okay, right. That's different. Yeah. All right. Yeah, cool.
Spot on. So being able to kind of have all of that information in a single view is really helpful because, again, not having to pivot between different solutions, and it takes a lot of time, obviously, to get to a lot of these information with different tools. So being able to have the data point to make the right decisions. And very recently, we actually helped a global high-end fashion retailer, and we were being compared to ServiceNow. That was their tech stack for asset inventory. We went in, we did a discovery, and we find 2.5 times more assets with RunZero than with ServiceNow. One example is the unmanaged devices, which is credentialed most of the time with ServiceNow. So being able to leverage RunZero Explorer to consolidate and add that information. So there were they were mainly unmanaged devices, and we went and took that data from RunZero and improved their CMDB. So we were able to export that data, and we have an integration with ServiceNow. That's actually one of the big use cases at see with when RunZero is improving CMDB accuracy.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, so we kind of covered the how to get data into RunZero with the data sources. We covered the asset inventory piece. Let's jump into what can you do with the data now. One thing that I wanted to cover here is the ability to, because we're continuously scanning the environment and the Explorer being able to provide an up-to-date inventory, we have the ability to surface what services, protocols, and ports are running on that asset. And what that allows us to do is to show you which assets in your environment are potentially exposed to a certain vulnerability. The vulnerability can be caused either from risky configuration or misconfiguration in your environment. And without having to rescan the environment and being able to get that data in a matter of seconds. So the page that I'm showing here is a queries page, and that's a library of pre-built queries where we're continuously updating to help you address some of those vulnerabilities. And I'll show the example in a second of, because it's kind of fresh on everyone's mind, I think, is the vulnerabilities reported by Progress Software impacting the WSFTP server. So we created what we call a rapid response blog post. And what the blog post does is it explains, how to find those instances, what is the vendor doing about it, are there updates available? And the really cool thing is, what query can you use to run in your inventory to find assets that might be potentially vulnerable to this vulnerability? So I can copy this, go back to the RunZero console in the inventory page, and on the top here, just paste that query. Yeah. Luckily, I don't have a result for this, but I'm very able to quickly, again, without having to rescan, find assets.
Yeah, so I mean, it's such a great use case. Like, it's funny because this is a more popular use case than it would have been a few years ago, which is some of these, I mean, what we call the celebrity vulnerabilities, right? The ones that are really going to get you done. We saw like when the 3CX bugs came out, the 3CX telephony stuff, being able to just find all that stuff in your enterprise super quick. Like RunZero was basically the only easy way to do that. Even when we saw these exchange bugs, I knew people who had to work real hard to locate all of the exchange, if you're in a big enterprise, and the RunZero customers were just like, find me my exchange, please. And then it just spits out a list of results. So it's very good for that. Yeah. It's good at finding stuff like, okay, say there's a new Fortinet bug. Bang, find all my Fortinets, a move it device, or as you said, WSFTP, like anything like that, you can, when it's hitting the news, maybe Grey Noise is telling everyone, hey, there's active exploitation kicking off around this bug, in this software. And you're like, well, hey, maybe we want to check and make sure we're not running that. And it's a single instant query instead of a search and destroy project for finding something. Yeah,
100%. And on top of that, you don't have to download new signatures. You don't have to rescan the environment
it's a query.
With those signatures.
It's just a query.
Exactly. Yeah. We have up-to-date information about your assets. So it's literally within seconds. Talking about kind of the really famous queries, Log4j was really, really big, of course. And we have a pre-built query for it. And with just a simple click, I can say search all assets or maybe only live assets. And this one, I think I have results for it. And it kind of shows you what is impacted or might be potentially impacted.
No, it's very cool. And it's worth pointing out too that like this isn't a vulnerability scanner. This isn't like a compliance focused vulnerability scanner. This is for people who need to be able to respond quickly to stuff that's presenting serious risks, right? There's not really much out there that you can use to do this. The idea that you can just have this insight instantly into what you have to do given a particular set of circumstances, like there's not really much out there that you can do this with. Let's put it that way.
Very true. I just thought of a customer that we've worked with last year. So it's an MSP, and they're kind of focused on providing incident response consulting. And they actually purchased RunZero literally a month before Log4j happened. And what we helped them with is they used the out-of-the-box query for Log4j, and they quickly were able to inform their customers well the vulnerability existed in the network and what software library were impacted without having, again, the need to rescan. So really, really useful.
Yeah, it is.
We talked earlier with our ability to integrate with third-party solutions is the security control coverage gap. So I'll take the example of CrowdStrike, and what this query does is it's going to show me the assets that have the CrowdStrike EDR agent. And this data I can get from the CrowdStrike console. That's not really important. What is really cool is you can say, actually show me what assets have been scanned by RunZero and do not exist in CrowdStrike. And this is going to show you a list that has, routers, some OT devices, and those are devices that cannot have the EDR agents. So
but I'm also seeing Microsoft Windows 10 there, which is
those are the
what's that doing there? That shouldn't be on that list.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you'll be surprised the stuff that we see sometimes, or Windows 7 in the environments, etc. So being able to kind of say, okay, I want to remove the noise, or I want to remove things that cannot have the EDR agents. So I can say, okay, show me server, desktops, and maybe laptops. So those are the ones that I can have the EDR agent on. So this is a much more accurate inventory that I can then act upon. These are going to be devices that in the environment that should have a CrowdStrike EDR that don't.
Yeah.
So it's a way of kind of showing also the unmanaged devices that exist in the environment. And by the way, I can change that keyword from here, and I can use Sentinel-1, for example, or I can say, show me the stuff that are in my domain controller that are not part of, stuff that discovered by RunZero not in my domain controller. So I can kind of play around with all of this. We're not just aggregating data from other tools. Our scanner is really, really helpful, telling you, hey, this asset is not in your management tools. It's probably an unmanaged device. You need to take a look at it. All right, perfect. So the next thing I wanted to show is, actually, before we jump into the reporting side, I think it's worth talking about the alerting side of the house. So a lot of the stuff that I've shown around the queries, you can automate that and be proactive around it. So I can do things like, I want to be notified if any asset pops up in the network that doesn't have CrowdStrike or might be impacted by MOVEit or Log4j, et cetera, et cetera. And I can be notified via email. I can also be notified via webhooks. And of course, that can trigger tickets and workflows in things like ServiceNow or Slack or Jira. So really helpful. And I can create different kinds of rules or alerts. The asset query result is usually the most common one, because I can come here and I can be notified on a combination of any data points that exist in the environment. For example, I could say I want to be notified anytime that I have protocol TLS that exists in my environment and it's deprecated. So this is going to be...
Well, I mean, you could even have an alert, excuse me, anytime a Windows, desktop joins that is domain joined and doesn't have CrowdStrike on it, let me know. Like there's so much flexibility here in what you can do.
Yeah, absolutely. And this one, for example, is going to tell me any asset that is running protocol TLS and it's expired, the certificates. So very, very flexible in the way that you can.
I mean, that's granular,
things.
Right?
Right, so, exactly, right. All right, so we have a couple of reports. I'm only gonna show two for the sake of time, and we have reports that are kind of topology based, other ones that just help you understand your environment better, like the RFC 1918 coverage. The one that I wanted to show is the network bridges report, and I think when it opens up, it's gonna be just overwhelming. So I'll try to jump into a specific site. So what the network bridge report shows you are going to be assets that are bridging networks together. And bridge detection is really useful to validate network segmentation. So want to ensure that when an attacker views your network, or how an attacker views your network, can they pivot and jump between one network to the other via an asset that is bridging networks together. Red circles are public IPs, green circles are green circles are private IP ranges. And this is going to be the asset. So I can click on the asset and view details about it. But what is cool is the queries we talked about can actually be overlaid on top of the report. So you talked about operating systems earlier. One that I like to show a lot is, hey, show me any asset that is bridging private network and public network, and then has, let's say, protocol RDP and an end-of-life operating system.
Wow, yeah, that's not something you want. Exactly. Like, talk about finding the the most awesome horror show demo query. Well done, Ali.
Yeah, this is pretty bad. So yeah, you can see like a Windows 7 right here, but then it's bridging outside with inside and a couple of networks together, and you can pivot across all of this. You can see. Okay,
yeah, well, I mean, that's one where you find that box and you jump like movie action style to hit the power switch.
One. Exactly. Yeah. This is really cool. So I can essentially paste the move it query or the log4j query in here. So you could go really in depth in investigation while seeing it from a topology perspective, not just the table or format. So really helpful.
Yeah.
Actually, there's a use case we had recently with a theme park. And they're a customer now, and they saw net flow traffic to a bad IP in China. And they went to their tool that had the asset inventory at that time, and that was their CMDB. They looked at the IP address, couldn't find, so they didn't know what that device was. So RunZero came in, we identified it as a Hivision DVR camera. And it was connected to a specific switch port. So they obviously like removed it. And they were like, well, hold on a second. Do we have any other Hivision cameras? And they found a dozen more. That kind of shows you the level of details and granularity that RunZero can go with.
Well, I mean, there's a bunch of places now, I think, isn't it, in the US where they've had to do rip and replace on Hivision, right?
Right, exactly.
So I can imagine you would have had a few US government departments coming to you saying, well, we just need it so we can find all the Hivision.
Right.
Yeah, it's easy to miss them, right? Because they're the devices that you just throw everywhere, like physically, I mean.
Yeah, exactly. We actually have a query for those, so those are going to be part of this NDAA 2019 section 889 that contains like a couple of cameras and devices. All right. One other thing really quick, switch topology, which is another kind of topology. And this allows you to understand, what assets are connected to which switch. And this data is enumerated via SNMP. But I think one critical data point that is related to risk is being able to tell you what assets are unmapped connected to that switch. So what that means is it is a MAC address that we did not find in an ARP cache or through any of the other techniques that RunZero uses for remote MAC address discovery. So in an environment where you have RunZero kind of connected to each network segment, an unmapped MAC might mean that we need to highlight a VLAN or a network segment that is missing from the scan scope. Or it can be just someone came in and plugged in, a laptop into a switchboard that you didn't know about, but now we told you about it. There's a full report.
I mean, this is about discovering what you don't know. I always go back to that Rumsfeld quote, right? Known unknowns.
Yeah.
There are things you don't know, and then there are the unknown unknowns. But this makes some previously unknown unknowns known unknowns.
Exactly. Right.
Which is good. Yeah.
Confusing but good.
Yes, exactly.
So we have actually an unmapped MACs report. So you can kind of see what switchboard is connected to, on what switch it is, and what the MAC address represents.
Yeah.
RunZero is multi-tenant by nature, and I'm just going to cover two other things, Patrick. I think it's worth mentioning. RunZero is multi-tenant by nature. We actually provide the ability to create what we call organizations. So that can be and different entities, different departments, etc. And those can be completely separated with its own role-based access control. So if it's a very large environment and you want to keep the data separate, or in the case of an MSP, for example, they can do that. We also have the concept of project, and it's pretty cool because let's say you are going to scan merger and acquisition, and you have a new company they're about to acquire, but you don't know how many assets they have. What you can do is you can spin up a project. It's going to be a whole dedicated environment, and we give you 5 times the license count that you have. So let's say you buy 5,000 asset license with RunZero. You create a project, you get 5 times more of that, so you get 25,000. So really helpful. But the thing to keep in mind is projects are ephemeral. So they only last for a certain time, but they're used for those ad hoc projects that you have where you don't know what to expect. And it keeps your data completely separated from production. That's it, Patrick. That's what I wanted to kind of show today. Yeah.
That's it. Well, that was really cool. That was a great demo. Thank you very much for walking us through that. I guess it's like runzero.com these days, isn't it? The domain. Yes. It's not. Congratulations for not having a .io domain like literally everybody else, right? So wanted to make sure.
Yeah, thank you.
That's right.
Yeah, and just to kind of summarize, if I may, Patrick. So yeah, RunZero is really kind of, in my opinion, the first step in your security, your risk management program. It's the first solution that you should go to when you go to understand what exists in your environment. Because if you don't know what to protect, you won't have a strong, comprehensive, all-encompassing security framework. We kind of show that we support different ways of populating data into RunZero. We want to make sure that we're not leaving certain environment or certain asset type. We want to encompass and cover all of the assets that you have in your environment, and being able to kind of provide that complete asset and attack surface visibility. We also kind of showed the ability for us to show you risk exposure before being compromised by leveraging the pre-built query library, or also building your own, and then being able to integrate, of course, with your other tools like EDRs for vulnerability management solutions and DM, etc.
I mean, I think anyone who wants to kick off like any sort of security uplift, say you've got a new job, you go into a new organization that hasn't had its ducks in a row, so to speak, you know, this is what you do first. You know, and probably one thing that we didn't really talk about that much in the demo is that this is very easy. You know, deploying the scanning agent, plugging it into a couple of APIs, you can be up and running with this very, very quickly. Getting this sort of visibility in the past was not something you would do after lunch. It was a project. And a big one, right? So, you know, it's very cool stuff. Ali Cheikh, thank you so much for joining me to walk us through it. That was really entertaining. Very good stuff.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Patrick.